Greetings, everyone. Dr. Corey Johnson here, author and contributor of Fostering Social Justice Through Qualitative Inquiry, a methodological guide. Super excited that the second edition is on its way, June 28th. And with me today, I have Dr. Kimberly Lopez from the University of Waterloo. Welcome, Kim.
Hi, thanks for having me. Happy to be
Yeah,
here.
it's great to have you here. And just for context, I want to let everyone know that Kim has contributed a chapter called Poised Against Ableism, Critical Disability Theory, Justice, and Verbing to Disablement. And Kim's chapter is located in a new section of the book called Snapshot Theory Chapters. And our goal was, instead of Diana Perry and I writing about the chapters we sort of knew the theories we sort of knew at a distance, we decided to go to young scholars who are just in the thick of it, really sort of the on-the-ground experts of their theory. And when I thought about critical disability theory, Kim, I thought of you. And so can you talk a little bit about why you agreed to our invitation to write the chapter?
Absolutely. I thought it was an amazing opportunity to be, held with a collection of scholars who are interested in social justice topics, but also theories that interrogate the multiple systems of oppression that we're faced with navigating on a daily basis, not from just a disability perspective, but against all these limiting labels that we take up and are assigned every day. So I thought, because of my experience with inclusive recreation and the need for TR to kind of bleed into disability studies, that this was a great opportunity for me to make that bridge for my own work and for students who are interested in taking up these theories, who are connected to therapeutic recreation.
Now, we talk about theoretical promiscuity in the book. And so this is not the only theory you use. Is that right? Can
No,
you
totally.
say a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm very intersectional in my work. I think disability is just one of many opportunities to critique the labels that are assigned to us in the very kind of narrow, normalized gaze of what's considered dominance, in particularly in what's centered as the West, or Eurocentric, US-centric paradigms and perspectives. So disability theory is just kind of one of a complement of, or a number of different theories that are, I think, necessary to meet objectives of social justice, or aims to be socially just in our work, alongside other theories, for sure.
Yeah. And it's interesting because as I was looking at the final proofs of the book and that sort of thing, I was thinking, many of our Snapshot authors could have written many of the chapters in the book. So so excited to have you involved and critical disability present in that selection of chapters. Can you talk a little bit about what you see as this contribution to the book, its significance and that sort of thing?
Absolutely. I think, critical disability studies has been around for a very, very long time, and it's kind of informed leisure studies in a number of different ways, particularly through therapeutic recreation. But sometimes in the conversations we're having in therapeutic recreation, we get kind of stuck on the one thing that disability is and does, and we might not see past the various applications disability or critical disability theory has in its contemporary application. So particularly now, as we're seeing kind of the move to be less rigid in our application of different labels, we're seeing the need for disability, again, to be one of many prongs that are needed to kind of identify and reveal the systemic oppressions that are kind of we're kind of working through. But for the book, I think what I really enjoyed putting together for my chapter was kind of this historic compilation of moments and turns in critical disability theory. And it was so difficult to stay really concise, but I think one thing that my chapter does is talk about the different approaches to critical disability theory and how we hope it to evolve over the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the challenges, but exciting aspects of these snapshot chapters, right? Is they're like 2,000, 2,500 words, additional readings and resources. So we asked you to be really concise, but we also asked to connect it to your work, which you've already sort of explained as therapeutic recreation. That's the context of a lot of your own research. Can you talk about what critical disability theory is?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's kind of what it does is that it works to uncover or reveal the ways our society has taken for granted the normalization of able-bodiedness, and also kind of really ignored what disability looks like and how the structures that we have in place are not supportive of a full living or full expression of humanity when attached to disability. So we're talking about disabling structures, not this disability as an individual impairment. We're talking about it as a societal one. So critical disability really asks people to bring to the fore this critical lens of identifying the ways in which our system continues to reproduce disabling conditions, but also disabling practices that continue to oppress people with disabilities.
So for me, and perhaps for you too, it seems a natural fit that critical disability theory is sort of under a larger umbrella of social justice. Do you agree? And if so, can you tell me a little bit about why and what does social justice mean to you in your work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a big question. It really is.
A huge question.
But disability, again, is something that has been necessitated out of exclusion. And because of that exclusion, and because of an inability for people with disability or people who are minoritized racially, religiously, like, culturally, linguistically, it's a nod to the efforts that are made to create equity and make advancements for justice for all peoples, and that came out of a lack of effort to ensure that all people have the ability to mobilize equitably in this world and have access, not in the very liberal sense that we should all have access in the same ways, but to identify the ways in which our structures continue to really, disadvantage people from those types of opportunities that so few people are afforded in our society.
Because this book is, I don't know, it's probably used mostly by graduate students, some young scholars or retooling scholars. Can you talk a little bit about the nature of your own evolution, perhaps from student to young scholar, as your relationship with social justice and critical disability theory have evolved?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. It was so easy to compartmentalize back then, wasn't it? I feel,
yes.
And this idea of social justice was kind of like this, we could all be mavens in our field and don, a certain hat and take up a certain methodology or theoretical or conceptual orientation. And that was kind of it. We could, clean our hands at the end of the day and put up our coats on our hooks and, go about our everyday lives otherwise. But I've quickly learned that, it is an embodiment of theory that we embrace when taking up theories like this one and other critical and social justice oriented inquiries. It is, excuse me, an engulfment of our whole selves into the theories and an enactment of our entire bodies and beings in these socio-political positions.
So, I know it's not necessarily in our script of questions, but it seems appropriate to ask you also, if this is such meaningful work and such embodied labor, like how do you care for yourself while you do that?
I think it's just being real and checking in with yourself every so often and acknowledging when things are difficult, because I think that's just a part of the system, and it's an apparatus of us to continue being really productive and, moving from one thing to the next thing without kind of taking pause to realize that, we can still sit within, for example, critical disability or critical race or critical, ethnic studies or other or language studies or something like that, and move within these domains really nicely, and still evolve in that way. So what I really liked about the opportunity to explore critical disability theory more deeply through this chapter was the need to see how so many other people take it up so differently. I think that allowed me to see and learn more and evolve and heal and reckon with some of the assumptions that I carried. And so I'm really kind of learning to take care of myself through being uplifted by the words of others and being supported by a community that you and Diana have assembled through this book. And I think it's been really helpful to create strong collegial relations and taking up this work together, because it's not easy. And we can all, have those moments where we can feel kind of overwhelmed by what's needed for justice. And I think it's important for people to remember that it's totally okay, that this is not solely our charge alone. It's kind of our collective need to tackle this all together. So that's a great question. I love being asked how we care for each other and ourselves.
Yeah, and I appreciate your response. Let's talk about your work. Let's get down to brass tacks. So how has critical disability theory been useful to your work, your project?
I think beyond the physical manifestations of disability, which is often kind of centered in disability, we can think of the myriad of ways that we are disabled by our systems, by the processes that we encounter on a daily basis. And so, like you said, I take up other theories, particularly critical race and other feminist theories and things like that. So in my current work, I'm looking at working with people who identify as women of color, who are in precarious labor positions, and talking with them about how they're disabled by their daily environment, particularly in light of their engagement with patients and residents and family members and administration during COVID-19. And so that's been a particularly difficult process, and identifying the ways in which, ableism and racism and misogyny and all of these other isms and phobias kind of manifest through their work on a daily basis. So it's been difficult work, but really exciting work. So we work towards continuing to ensure that people are given a process to air their grievances and allow for justice to take place in a really meaningful way and restorative way for them through their labor.
As young scholars, a lot of our readers will be looking for methodology. Are there particular methodologies or things to consider when using critical disability theory as part of the theoretical framework?
I think something that's kind of popped up in conversation in literature these days is, narrative inquiry. We're all kind of lovers of narrative inquiry, but we're also moving to a point of critique of narrative inquiry as well, as particularly for equity-seeking groups, or equity-deserving groups rather. They're being asked to share their stories in order to, gain compassion or be heard in some way. And it's a really an interesting debate that's happening around narrative inquiry. Who do we owe these stories to? Who was entitled to have these stories? So it's interesting that we're making that shift through narrative inquiry. But narrative inquiry has always been something that's been useful for contextualizing the systemic oppression that we are working to reveal through something like critical disability theory. But also, there are so many cool methodological or methods that are so fun and easy to work with through technology. So a lot of arts-based work, because we have to remember that, a lot of research is very English centered, very, written centered. We have to think about other ways that people are able to express themselves. So arts-based work is really important. Also digital and visual work is also really important, particularly as we continue to navigate a pandemic that requires many of us to be socially distant. And also reaching across, nation states, that the need for digital work is so necessary as we continue to fight climate change and want to avoid travel and things like that. So there are so many possibilities for taking up critical disability theory through those methods.
That's awesome. Thanks. I want to talk a little bit about ethics. And we never want to overemphasize ethics to the disservice or the creation of a deficit model, right? But there are things that we have to be mindful of ethically when we use particular theories and do research with particular populations. What would you say that we need to think closely about when we consider ethics in relation to our design, our execution, our analysis, our interpretation, representation, all of those things, right? So any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, we fight with this this notion of positionality and subjectivity, and whether or not we identify positionally with the theories that we take up is something that one needs to consider at the very least, right? And we don't need to kind of move into a full identity politics discussion when we do this, because that in itself sometimes can be limiting. But it is important to consider, how we are in relation to these conversations, and what's needed from the community that's most affected by the work that we produce, to be heard from the people who are primarily doing the writing and the telling, and the people who have power, which are the people who are taking up these theories largely, right? So those are important things to consider, most definitely. Ethically, also when we're talking about critical disability theory, as opposed to other disability theories, how are we kind of reproducing some of the stigmas and stereotypes and tropes in the work that we produce? So as we strive to make light of those, those reproductions and oppressions, we want to continue to reflect on the work that we create so that it doesn't kind of fall into that same pattern of subjugation and pure representation and tokenism and that type of thing.
Yeah, great points. Are there things you wish scholars who didn't know anything about critical disability theory, are there things that you wish they did know or better understood, maybe for the young scholar or the novice scholar?
Particularly for folks who are coming from an interdisciplinary field, that disability studies has a very long and established tradition. So if you're coming from somewhere like leisure studies, you're coming from another field like that kind of blends and is able to borrow and meld some of these longstanding traditions together in their practice, that this has a very complicated history and a very long and established timeline of events that kind of led it to where it is now. And I think in being able to do justice to this theory, that we take pause and recognize that history, and also lean into how those shifts in that particular field inform the work that we want to do with it.
Mm-hmm. And what do you see as the future of, critical disability theory?
Mm-hmm. I think like a lot of other disability theories that we're, a lot of other critical theories that we're seeing, like what theory looks like beyond these labels, which is really interesting. So not a disregarding of identity labels, but what that looks like to move through them. So a post-identity space, or an intersectional sort of way. But we know that Crenshaw talked about how intersectionality has been taken up in ways that she didn't imagine that it would ever be talked about. So it's interesting to me to see how, public discourse and mainstreaming of these theories are continuing to push the envelope in very different ways. So I do see, this disability theory and critical disability theory as trending towards more of an intersectional critique, and a way to kind of continue to advocate for people who are not readily seen as the most socially and economically mobile group in society.
Gosh, that's really insightful. We're going to wrap things up, but I have one more question before we go. And that is, if you were going to give advice to someone who was about to pick up critical disability theory, what would that be?
Be open to learning and be open to making mistakes, but know that, this is all of your learning and all of the efforts that you make towards enacting these theories are important moves towards justice. And as we continue to learn and grow from, our efforts in this space, that's all important work towards wherever you end up. And no doubt, something like critical disability theory, wherever you end up, will inform your learning and will kind of teach you and shape you to be a better, more conscientious scholar.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. We've been talking with Dr. Kimberly Lopez from Recreation and Leisure Studies in the Faculty of Health at the University of Waterloo. Her chapter, Poised Against Ableism, Critical Disability Theory, Justice, and Verbing to Disablement, comes out June 28th. In the book, Fostering Social Justice Through Qualitative Research, a Methodological Guide. Kim, thanks so much for being with us here today. And we look forward to seeing the book when it comes out and gobbling up your chapter.
Thanks so much for having me. This was fun.
Great. Have a great day.